All right. Welcome, everyone. We'd love to have you today, or excited to see everyone joining this webinar. We'd like to discuss the new year and client-patient responsibilities and some of those best practices that we can speak to that are things to kind of keep in mind and moving on into the year and what those roles mean for your organization as well as your clients. So before we get started, we just want to kind of make a general announcement. Please use the Q&A button that you'll see at the bottom of your screen during the Zoom bar. The chat box is turned off to make sure that we don't miss any comments, questions, or concerns. So just a little bit of a navigation best practice. If you can bring all of your questions to the Q&A button, we'll do our best to answer them as they come in and identify anything we can kind of clarify for you throughout this presentation. But we'll go ahead and just start with who your hosts are for this presentation. You have myself, Ashley Haskins.
And I'm Megan Linden.
And the two of us will kind of be jockeying back and forth between the conversation today to kind of go over the key points of what we're going to cover in this presentation. And as you can see here from this screen, we have a couple of just really simple topics that we'll break down for you, go into the details, discuss where we see things that are best practices from an industry standpoint, practices within your internal organization, as well as how we look at the CR process and molding all of that together.
So I'll go ahead and get started with just some introduction of some terms that you'll hear us discussing throughout the webinar. So the first one, obviously, that we want to go over is what exactly is client eligibility? Client eligibility is the process of gathering information regarding a client or patient's insurance coverage, including their status, the limitations of coverage, responsibilities, requirements and authorizations, and reimbursement. This all directly ties back into starting your year off successful to make sure that you have this information readily available to start the year off right. The other piece we want to go over is verification of benefits. These two terms, believe it or not, are pretty much interchangeable. Verification of benefits is typically the same thing as client eligibility. They go hand in hand, one into one, basically the same process. You'll just hear different organizations and different team members using different terms. So just wanted to clarify that that's where we're starting, and those are going to be your 2 points of terms for this presentation. So first off, we want to go into what is the VOB process, the verification process. What does that entail? What materials should you use when you're conducting a verification of benefits on a client? So the first thing you want to go over when you're starting the verification process is to make sure, first and foremost, you have a copy of the client's insurance card. Make sure you have a copy of the front and the back of those insurance cards for all active policies. If they have a primary, if they have a secondary, if they have a tertiary, you want copies of all of those cards at the start of every year to make sure that there aren't any changes. Part of that step one process is also you want to start contacting the benefits department via phone call based on the phone number on the back of your insurance, the back of that insurance card. You want to make sure that you're confirming that you're speaking with the department for the types of services that you are calling to get verification on. So you want to make sure that if you're calling to get ABA benefits, you're speaking with the correct department. If you're getting speech benefits, you want to make sure that you're speaking with the department to go over speech benefits, because they do vary. So you want to make sure that you confirm you're first off in the right department, that you're getting the plan name, the policy information, so that regards who's the policy holder. Is it mom? Is it dad? Is it self? The start date of the policy. Some policies are year to year, meaning they start January 1 and December 31st. Or is it a calendar year plan where it starts at March 1st and ends February 28th? Knowing that information is going to trigger you to identify when deductibles, out-of-pockets, copays, all of that restarts. When you're making those verification benefit calls, you also want to make sure that you're collecting the information as far as the deductible amounts, their copays, their co-insurances, and any out-of-pocket expenses. That's the step one in your verification process. Step two is, what are the best practices to verify on a call? And what are some of the key questions that you want to ask during these calls? Because you want to make sure you have this information for all future dates of service. So you want to make sure that you first off confirm that your specific codes are covered. So remember, ABA codes, speech codes, OT codes, physical therapy codes, they're all different. You want to make sure that you're getting benefits based off of the codes that you plan on billing for the services that you're rendered. Asking if this particular client just has basic ABA benefits, you're going to get a typical vague answer where you might find out that a parent training code or social skills classes are not covered. So making sure you get as specific as possible with those codes for all services is going to be important to make sure that you have the correct verification of benefits. You want to confirm the plan type. Is it a PPO? Is it an HMO? Is it an EPO? Is it a Medicaid plan? Is it a Medicaid HMO plan? All that information is going to help you identify what your reimbursement is going to be, what codes you could use, how frequent you could use the codes, because depending on the plan, those things can change. You also want to confirm if the diagnosis code that you have for that client is pertaining to the services rendered and also a covered diagnosis code. Multiple clients might have multiple diagnosis codes. You might have one that's primary for ABA versus one that's primary for speech therapy. You want to make sure that those codes and the diagnosis codes align with the services that you render to make sure that those are covered. You also want to find out if there's an authorization required. Again, you want to go back and make sure that you're getting authorization requirements for specific codes. Asking if ABA requires an authorization versus speech could give you a vague, incorrect information. So you want to make sure that you're getting down to the nitty gritty of it really, and making sure that all the codes that you plan on providing for the services rendered are also covered, and if they require authorization or don't require authorizations. You want to confirm if there's any exclusions around a diagnosis. Does the autism diagnosis have any exclusions? Are there limitations on the policy? Can you bill speech with an autism diagnosis as primary? You need to find out all that information during the verification process to make sure that you're billing out claims compliantly moving forward. You also want to confirm maximum allowable visits. We know in the past, some specialties give you a limitation for the year. You might only have 60 for the year. You might only have 90. Some give you a larger amount of visits. Some don't have visit limitation. They just have authorization units or dates of service. So getting that information is going to be important to make sure that your verification is accurate and correct for the services and the treatment plans that you're putting into place for this client. Another one you want to remember is if there's any age restrictions or limitations to the policy. We do know that some payers in some states state after a certain age, they no longer will provide services in a school-based setting. Knowing that information with your verification of benefits is going to make sure that you're not rendering services that are not covered by that client's policy. You also, with that, want to make sure that you're confirming if there are specific places of services that are covered or not covered. Not all policies are going to cover school-based services. Not all policies are going to cover telehealth services. Not all policies are going to cover community services. So understanding which places of service this policy covers is going to be important to make sure that you can accurately provide the services that are needed for this treatment plan. Step 3. What are the best practices in verifying the claims details with regards to billing for services? So when you're verifying the benefits for a client, you want to make sure that when you're documenting this call, you get the first name of the person that you spoke to and the last initial, as well as a reference number for your call. When you're going through all of these pieces, you want to make sure that you get as many details as possible so that in the future, if a claim comes back denied for not covered, for authorization required when you were told there was no authorization, having all this information written down in a standard form and standard notating within the system, within your practice, within your organization will better help you argue if there is claims denials in the future. So tips, right? What can you do to make sure that you have a successful verification of benefits process? One thing you want to make sure that you have is that you have a process that triggers the verification of benefits and any affiliated workflows. So when do you start this verification process? Do you start it in November? Do you start it in December? When do you start having those communications with your clients of asking them for updated information? You want to ensure that the process after verification of benefits triggers an authorization where applicable. You want to make sure that once that verification of benefits is completed and you've gotten confirmation that authorization is or is not required, if an authorization is required, you want to make sure that you are triggering somebody else in the organization to follow up on that authorization process. It's best practice to check the benefits at the start of every year and every 6 months if possible. You never know if somebody's changing jobs, if they have plan changes, if they've left a job and are now on COBRA, anything like that. You always want to do your due diligence to make sure that you are getting the most accurate information as frequently as possible. Another thing that you want to remember is you do not want to render services before completing a full verification of benefits. If you don't have that information, you could be providing services that are not covered. That could be a higher out-of-pocket expense to the family or are not reimbursable and you've already rendered the service. What do you do when a client has more than one commercial insurance? You want to make sure that when somebody has more than one commercial insurance, not only are you checking the verification of benefits, you're confirming with the family that they've completed a coordination of benefits. Whose policy is first? For those of you who don't know, you want to make sure that the birthday rule applies and should be considered on a regular basis when a family has more than one commercial policy. Making sure that the family is aware of that information and keeping their coordination of benefits up to date is imperative in making sure that you have a successful verification of benefits. You also want to ask the family if they have more than one insurance carrier. Do they have a primary? Do they have a secondary? Do they have a tertiary? Is there any financial assistance? Is there any grants that they're using to pay for their copays or their out-of-pocket responsibility? You want to make sure that all this information is recorded with the verification of benefits. And you also want to make sure that verification of benefits is completed on all insurance policies. So if mom has a primary, dad has a primary, you want to make sure that you get the same information on both of those. You want to make sure that there's a coordination of benefits set up and that verification of benefits is set up for both of them. When in doubt, make a call to ensure that the information is obtained correctly. Portals, as reliable as we like to think that they are, unfortunately for a lot of behavioral benefits, they're not up to date on a regular basis. The best way that you can make sure that you have accurate information is to call the number, get that person on the phone, verify everything that you need, and making sure that you get that reference name and number to put into your notes for future reference. It's also important to remember that some insurance cards, if you look at the back, the number on the back of the card is actually for medical benefits. The best place that you're going to find behavioral health contact information, if it's not on the card, is going directly to the insurance carrier's website or portal to get the most updated information. Again, verification of benefits is imperative on making sure that you have a successful start of the year. So making sure you're calling the right number, getting the right department, getting all of this information is going to start your year off right.
All right. So as we've kind of gone through just the last two slides, we can already grasp that missing some very critical triggers in what we ask, how we ask it, who we're asking it to, can really make the difference on what happens on the claims end. How does that look like from a revenue perspective for your organization? What kind of details are you thinking will generate income that end up not missing certain processes and pieces? And Megan just demonstrated some really key high-level items that cause a lot of catastrophic pieces to create non-payment. So how do you kind of take all that information and build yourself a nice, robust resource? We're going to talk about that here. How can we use CentralReach to automate that verification process? So we want to utilize the system to the best of its capability to kind of aid in that process. How do we create templates or standardized workflows? We want to make sure that those things trigger next steps. Like Megan mentioned earlier, a verification of benefits is the first step. If it then leads to an authorization being requested, it should trigger the next process. So how do we use CentralReach to create those workflows and triggers to do those next steps? And then finally rounding out on the workflow end. So how do workflows keep our client services moving? How do we keep authorizations, allowing us to schedule? And where does the process take us next wherever it's needed? So it's kind of a flow chart system, all beginning with how we intake the information and what workflows we have next. For those of you on this presentation who are familiar with the system or maybe new to some of these concepts I just mentioned, the visual on the right here gives you a little bit of an idea of how the platform offers these resources. You can see from the upper right-hand corner, that first little window shot is a way to generate a utilized template in either the authorizations process or the verification of benefits here. As Megan said, the two kind of go hand in hand for a lot of industry services. So creating a workflow that does that trigger would be starting at creating the general intake questionnaire. So just like we can create standardized templates for clinical notes, we can do the same thing for insurance verification. So all those questions that Megan outlined, the client's primary, secondary, is there a coordination on file, a coordination of benefits on file? Does this cover CPT codes? Does this require a diagnosis? All of those details she went into great length before, as she mentioned, are critical key points to making sure your verification is as robust and as informative as it can be before you start rendering services. So to keep all of that consistently asked every time a verification is performed, generating a template to ensure whoever it is you have tasked with that workflow kind of has that initial document to go through checks and balances. Did I ask this question? Do I need to move on to the next one? Do they have caps? Do they have age limits? All of those details can be added into a standardized template. And by calling it the insurance verification or an authorizations template, you'll see by the second image in the middle of the screen on the right that this is where exactly that template can be grabbed. So let's say, for example, you've developed a workflow where you now have a template. You can go into the tasking module of CentralReach and initiate the task. And this task could be maybe, let's say, for example, initiated by your clinical coordinator who says, I know this client's coming up. Let's go ahead and have this verification redone. We're at the 6-month marker. So I'm going to go ahead and create a task for my intake team to go ahead and create that trigger for them to do that verifications call. By creating the task here, you can see that about midway or just below the description box, there is a hyperlink that indicates to use a template. That can then be linked to any standardized template form that has been created within the platform to allow there to be a supplemental document to the coordinator team to ask said questions. You can then customize this tasking workflow to having due dates, assignments, responsibilities, label adaptions, and kind of create an internal workflow, all utilizing one platform within the system to intercommunicate. And then last but not least, on the last view you see here, this is a view of the tasking module, which allows a high-level overview of workflow management. Using labels and key pieces, you could see who the task is assigned to, what category it falls within by using labeling as a source of organization, and when is that task likely to be completed by, things like that. All ways to utilize a workflow and ways to communicate interdepartmentally within your team and have high-level oversight to those task completion workflows. So let's talk a little bit more about creating that verification template with custom contact forms. We can see here that really in the custom contacts feature within the platform, this is not limited to just clinical notes. This really can be opened up to a lot of different platform functionality purposes. And for the purpose of this demonstration, we're tying that to the verification of benefits process. So from here, we can go into contact forms, create a new form, and standardize a plethora of questions. We have resources at the CentralReach side to help you kind of devise what that looks like, how to insert information if you're not familiar, how to build a custom contact form. But this is just to give you some idea of how it really is customizable. And what's so great about creating a custom contact form is it's also serving as a dual purpose. It allows you to collect the data in a HIPAA compliant environment. which when it relies to gathering date of births, patient subscriber information, or maybe sensitive client information, we always are all super sensitive about whether this is meeting all the HIPAA compliant needs. So by curating this information within a standardized form in the platform, you're already crossing that box off, knowing that it's contained within the CentralReach platform in that secured environment. The third added benefit of using a custom contact form is it really alleviates the use of paper in a filing system that you have to now house somewhere else. So if we can centralize using the system for all three of these pieces, we can not only connect the custom contact form to our client's file, we can ensure that it's HIPAA compliant and secure, and we can make sure that those records are really available to whoever has access to resource them within the system and not causing waste or use of space within an office where a lot of things have become digitized and resourced more available within the platform itself. So another area, just kind of expanding on how we can capitalize on CentralReach and its functionality, is to make sure we're also looking at using the client payer profile to share information related to the client's patient responsibilities, copays, deductibles, and insurances. So make sure we're using those for future reference. As you could see here, the view that I have on the right is a snapshot of an insurance profile. It gives me the name of the insurance, the subtype. It then lists what we've identified as patient responsibility. And this ties into that verification of benefits step. If I am calling on a client and I want to check to see what their United Behavioral Health Plan benefits are for, let's just say, speech services, I may be informed that they have a specialty visit rate of $25 for every visit when they come in for speech services. So I want to document that in a place in the system that lets us know that speech services have this caveat to each visit. And in the patient responsibility area, you can see we've identified this payer as primary. We've allocated that there's a $25 visit rate, and these fields allow you to expand that to not just visit, copay, or coinsurance as well. So you may have clients who have multiple ways of identifying that patient portion part of their claims processing. So how you choose to operate that within the organization really determines how you capitalize on this. It'll indicate the coverage term date. So to Megan's earlier point, if there's a secondary or a tertiary, all of this information can be curated with each individual payer, identifying each of their respective responsibility portions. The benefit to using this part of the platform is the third point here, which is it's going to allow us to capitalize on collections. If you can automate these features into the payer profile, you can automate them into assignment for charges on the invoicing side. So by curating $25 as a per visit indicator for this family, I can then go into all of our services that this client is going to receive once they've received them, assign a $25 per visit charge to the designated appointments I'd like to affiliate them to, so I can invoice that copay up front within the system just by using a couple of clicks versus having to manually add this and look at it line by line. So just capitalizing on using the platform for automation and effective use of the system to curate those charges. So we talked about a lot of really key benefits here. Megan touched on the functionalities of why verification of benefits are so important, how frequently we should be doing them, what types of questions are super important to ask. We then tied that into how do we use all of that information and capture it in a most effective manner by using resources already existing in CentralReach in order to do that. And we also kind of wanted to kind of put that in a nice little package and wrap that all up to going, well, how does that look as a whole and curate the next workflow? So hopefully through this conversation, we've kind of had you starting to create ideas and thoughts and plans on how you could use some of these practices we talked about if you're not currently going through them, or ensuring that you looked at maybe creating ways to install these mechanisms within your organization, because ultimately, to the earlier point, is all of these things are critical. They rely on happening at an accurate and a qualitative standpoint so that claims will be processed and paid accordingly. One of the rules that we use over here is that if you don't ask, they don't tell. So you have to know how robust your resources are to ensure you're limiting as much risk as you can on the insurance end and that risk you have to the organization as a tool. So leveraging central reach to help make that all interconnect and communicate is just another really critical way to maximize those results. So I kind of, cheated a little bit here on this slide and talked about central reach and some of the tools, but just once again, why is central reach really a great way to look at this problem and solution is because it's really the number one autism and intellectual disability care platform that really gives our providers a full, robust service to kind of connect, capitalize, execute, and develop integral pieces of our practice management or your clinical resources, and just really allows you to kind of create different solutions to problems that you have within your organization. So we want to encourage you to continue those discussions or those thoughts and think about maybe, are we doing something that seems really manual? Is there a better way to capitalize on this? And who do we need to resource at the central reach level to ask some questions about ways we can improve our internal workflows? So with that, Megan, I'll go ahead and let you have the other side of the screen here.
Sure, of course. So why Sierra BillMax? If we've gone over all this information for you and you have the central reach platform, why would you use Sierra BillMax for these types of things? So for Sierra BillMax, one of our major processes during the implementation is to make sure that these roles, responsibilities, triggers are all set up for you during the implementation process. So when it comes time for the start of the new year, it's already set up. You just have to follow the workflows that we've been given and have set up for you to make sure that you are successful in starting the year off right with verification of benefits. We are a partner in all of this together. So if you have higher level questions, you might not be able to get the correct information. You might not have necessarily the right information, the right phone numbers. All of the team here at Sierra BillMax, we have the expertise as well as the experience to make sure we partner with you, not only in making sure you have the most up-to-date information, but making sure that your system and your team is set up to make sure that these pieces are checked off at the start of every year.
Thank you, Megan, for that. I appreciate it. So I greatly appreciate the detail as far as how those two pieces target. The key point here is partnership on all of those fronts, whether it's partnership with the platform and utilizing your resources for the central reach, or looking at expanding a partnership with the BillMax and asking some resources. Partnership is really the key term here to helping you maximize your organization's growth and workflows. So with that, I'd like to remind this group that we will have a survey here at the end of this presentation in just a moment. We would love to hear your feedback or your thoughts on this webinar. So if you could please take and stay back for just a few more minutes and complete that survey, we greatly appreciate hearing your feedback and ways that we continue to offer and support our community. We're going to go ahead and transition here and open it up for questions and things that we're addressing here in the Q&A box. But we want to thank everyone for giving us your time today and your attention foremost, and just hearing all of the details that may or may not have been familiar to you, but hope we added value to something that you're thinking about, or increasing information to help you as an organization just touch that many more families out in the community. So thank you everyone for your time and appreciate everyone's half hour.